Hello and welcome to the Indian Administrator channel. So in the previous video related to sociology, we have discussed the emergence of sociology, that how sociology emerges. In this sociology series, in this particular video, we will be discussing another topic, that is science, scientific methods and its critique. So in a nutshell, we will be discussing following topics: the concepts, observations, hypothesis, science, scientific methods, and what is religion, elements of scientific methods, and generalizations. So these are the topics which are being asked in UPSC since several years. So as sociology is not much of a subject which can be taught by writing it on blackboard or by on a digitizer or something, so I will keep this lecture as more in an audible form rather than a written thing. So let's start with the topic, science and scientific methods. Okay, so what is science? Science is defined as a systematic body of certifying and changing knowledge which is based on observable facts. So the set of procedural steps which are adopted to acquire this knowledge is called scientific methods. So scientific methods is a procedural step in which we adopt to acquire this knowledge of science. So science is a systematic body, as we have seen in the definition, means that it is a knowledge that is acquired methodologically and which is certified, and whereas in common sense it is a random. Common sense is a random which is gained and automatically with the development of human mind or with age. So if a person who has a common sense, means common sense comes with an age particular or with an experience, but this is not in case with science. And whereas religion is not a scientific, and it is rather based on faith and intuition. So once you started believing in God, then you believe him as a super entity. So this is the religion. So once you start that believing in God, then you believe that there is one super entity and God has never been, but the God has never been seen or observed, and he has never been identified in a scientific way. So it is purely a belief that God is there, that if someone dies on a pilgrim to Vaishno Devi Mata or to Tirupati or somewhere in a stampede or wherever, so people calls them lucky because they think that this is the God's God calls him and he is now to the heaven's door or inside the heaven. So like this in Mecca, thousands of pilgrims died with fire. So Saudi Arabian authority negligence was there, but people justified the death as salvation. So science is not like a religion. In science, you don't accept something just because Newton said that, rather you try to test it and you try to prove it properly. So science starts by questioning everyone. Only if the ideas are certified, they are accepted. Otherwise, they are not carried by the reputation or status of the person. Like the Prime Minister Narendra Modi said this, so this is the universal truth. So like same in the idea, religions are absolute. For example, in Islam, it is said that Quran is the last word of Allah and it cannot be changed. And this is the reason Taslima Nasreen, she was hounded around the world as she questioned Quran. So if you are aware of this incident. So in science, every idea is accepted only as long as it is certified by an authority or certified by various people or scientists. So tomorrow if a new fact comes to light, then the previous idea is abandoned by science. So it is science is also evolving to the next generation by this. So let's understand this simple concept with the help of an example. Newton, when he was conducting his experiments, he found that wherever light falls on an opaque object, a shadow is created. So he started to explain that using his law of inertia. So Newton said, because light is traveling in linear fashion along a line and there is an obstruction in the passage, so shadow is cast, and because law of inertia applies to matter, so he concluded that light is a matter. So but light is a matter, so let's see what happens. So he formulated a corpuscular theory of light. So he further concluded that light is made up of small particles which are called corpuscles. So but no one accepted Newton's claim because of his reputation that he is a scientist of a great repute. So another scientist, while performing experiments on quantum physics, especially interference theory, which falsifies Newton's hypothesis that light is not made up of particles but it is waves, and wave motion theory emerges. So later on Einstein comes into the picture and he clarified that the packet of particles are photons and also as waves, so it behaves in a dual fashion. Sometimes it waves and sometimes it behaves as a particle. So he gave rise to wave particle duality theory. So in this way, one concept is falsified by other scientists, then it is again falsified by the Einstein, and then a wave particle duality theory comes there. So if in case in near future someone else comes with a different theory, then all these theories will become absolute. So in this way, corpuscular theory changed to wave particle dualism theory. Many questioned wave particle theory, but as it was certified, it becomes a scientific theory. So people don't issue fatwa against the scientists because science is always changing and it is evolving. So there are many studies conducted worldwide about different aspects of consuming alcohol, fat intake, related to different things, and these research are often published in newspapers. So like this, I can remember one study which was once published in late 2010, which reveals that consuming 50 ml of alcohol is good for health, and after 6 months or so, another theory reveals that drinking red wine for 3 times a day improves memory. So as scientists do research work, science changes every time an experiment is done. So another important difference between science and religion is that in science, basis of observation is sensory, whereas religious knowledge is absolute. Basic of certification is sensory organs in science, like what you feel, what you touch. It's in your senses, but in religion it's faith and intuition is the main certification. So the word science is also used for the method and methodologically acquired knowledge. So science always follows the method, which is a set of procedural steps, which I have discussed earlier also, that the steps that are performed. In nutshell, procedure for acquiring the knowledge of science is called scientific method. So till now we have discussed what is scientific method. So the procedure for acquiring the knowledge of science is called the scientific method. So now let us discuss the elements of scientific method. So there are some elements of scientific method like assumptions, concepts, observations, hypothesis, and generalization. These are the elements of scientific methods. So first prerequisite of the procedural step, when you do something, you have to do it in steps. So first prerequisite of the procedural step is that we start with a set of assumptions. The assumptions itself is non-certified and is a paradox of scientific method. So what does this mean? What is the paradox of scientific method? That it is needed to assume something in the beginning to certify it scientifically. It is needed to start with an assumption because without assumption, observations cannot be carried out. Let's understand this thing with a simple example. Suppose a person goes to a doctor, and as doctor is a scientist, person tells him about headache. Doctor starts reading his blood pressure as he has a methodology as a part of his training, and he has trained to accept an assumption that body is interconnected and malfunctioning in one part can be caused by malfunctioning in the other part. So for this reason, doctor looked for other symptoms. If doctor hadn't has an assumption, then it was very difficult to diagnose a disease, like looking for a needle in a haystack. So, without assumption, doctor cannot carry out observation and can conclude anything. So it is the same situation. Suppose you are asked to go out and observe in a shopping mall. After some time you came back bewildered that there were so many things to observe, like people, couple, mosquitoes, flies, bags, pets, AC vents, tube lights, etc. So the things which you observe were facts, which is different from knowledge. When facts are connected in a meaningful way, it gave rise to knowledge. Which facts are connected with which other facts legitimately is depicted by assumption. So in the similar way, there was a study in England which investigated the fact that in the years when the import of perfume was very high from France, then the marriage rate in England increases. It was concluded that because of usage of perfumes, people attracted to each other and they started getting married in large numbers. But this incident was further investigated, and based on the light of facts, it was concluded that in that particular year there was increase in number of jobs, and as people had surplus money, they spent it on perfumes, and as they thought they are now settled, they started getting married. So in this way, one assumption can be falsified, or can be, the reason can be anything. So in the earlier scenario, it was a mere observation that because of perfume people are getting married. But this observation, if taken without any further investigation, can prove us wrong and can provide us wrong knowledge. Therefore, the connection of the fact are very important, and also assumption of the reality we try to search is important. That is why one of the prerequisites of scientific method is the set of assumptions. So this assumption in social sciences is called perspectives. A social scientist starts with a single perspective or a set of perspectives. In physical and natural sciences, these assumptions are also called as paradigm. Paradigm are those assumptions of realities which are universal valid. As society, social sciences assumptions are not that much universal. So the word paradigm is not used in social sciences, but in physical sciences, assumption can be universally valid. Hence, word paradigm is used. And that is why one scholar of science, Thomas Kuhn, in his book Structure of Scientific Revolutions, talked about two kinds of science. One, he talked about normal science, and other, he talked about revolutionary science. According to him, normal science is the one where research tends to support justified experiences. Most scientific inquiries are like that, but sometimes scientific research leads to questioning of the existing assumptions and need to change of assumption. That is what he calls as evolutionary science. For example, like the assumption of Newtonian physics do not hold true for Einsteinian physics, as they belong to two different paradigms. The change of assumption in natural or physical sciences is called a paradigmatic shift. But social sciences doesn't have assumptions that are called paradigm. Hence, social scientists start with a set of assumptions. This is the reason that when we will start with the thinkers in the coming series of our lectures, we will start with their basic assumptions to understand their ideas, their methodologies, and their observations. Now we will discuss about the concepts. Concept refers to abstract symbols in terms of which reality is approached, comprehended, and communicated. Let me go through the definition again for their better understanding. That concepts refers to abstract symbols in terms of which reality is approached, comprehended, and communicated. All languages are concepts. For example, when we say Newton's principle of gravitation, there is not anything exist materialistically, but it's an idea which is described in terms of a model. Unlike our day-to-day language, which is not precise, where concepts are not clearly defined in scientific language, in scientific language, concepts are defined in an unambiguous ways. They are standardized. So that comprehension and communication about them should not be any confusion. So every science has to have a body of concept. And in terms of these concepts, the science approaches the reality which it wants to study. Now, observation. As we discussed in the starting, that scientific knowledge is based on observable facts that certified in terms of the observer. So carrying out observation is the scientific necessity of the scientific method. We also discussed in the perspective that scientific observation is not a random observation. Rather, it is a guided search for facts. As we discussed, observing a shopping mall crowd randomly, as we have discussed. Now imagine a similar situation but with one difference this time. Now person is told to observe a certain store. Then this observation will become guided observation, and only certain facts have to be observed in a certain relationship. The facts then will be observed like the products of the store, people entering the store, people buying specific items, food, footfall, etc. To make it more specific, if a person is told to observe shopping mall for the people who are making purchases, one has to look only at the visitors carrying shopping bags. So again it's specific. Then in this scenario, the scope of observation is decided beforehand, that only certain chosen facts in a certain well-defined relationship are taken. That is how it becomes the guided search. To make and facilitate this both in physical and social sciences, scientists start the observation with the hypothesis. So now here we comes on what is hypothesis. Science begins its observation with the hypothesis. A hypothesis is a tentative assumption which postulates certain relationship between chosen facts or variables. Certain relationship means certain chosen aspects of reality. For example, a sociologist begins with hypothesis that urbanization leads to increase in divorce rate, which is a tentative assumption that social scientists can assume it to be true initially. Now there are two sets of facts and variables in this hypothesis: urbanization and divorce rate, and relationship between the urbanization and divorce rate. So urbanization is dependent variable and divorce is a dependent variable. That any fluctuation or increase in urbanization would have effect on divorce. Sociologists will only look out for these and their relation, and then they will observe the rate of urbanization in different countries and then divorce rate in different countries, and then they try to establish and validate any correction between the two or correlation between the two. So please note that hypothesis is an assumption which is not certified and established, and sometimes hypothesis is deducted from perspective, which is also an assumption. One of the source of hypothesis is perspective from which an assumption can be deducted. So hypothesis has to be very specific, otherwise it may not be verifiable. Hypothesis to be verified has to be very brief and it has to be unambiguous. Suppose a statement is made that maybe it would rain in the evening today. So now this statement is not verifiable because it has may. And if it rains, then a person who has stated this can say that he said that he was right, that it rained today. And if it didn't rain, then also he can claim himself to be right, that he said, because he said it is may. He said it may rain. So hence this statement cannot be deducted and it is ambiguous. But on the other hand, if it is said sharp at 9 it will rain, this statement is specific and precise and cannot be disputed. So another feature of assumption is that assumption should be potentially falsifiable. This is a very important feature. It can be checked about its claims. Sometimes it may not be possible to start with hypothesis when research is conducted in an area because of unawareness of the studied universe. So as to start with hypothesis, some sort of knowledge of universe of study is required. So suppose where a research is conducted where no knowledge exists, then the research can be started with the observation, but sooner or later a hypothesis needs to be formed. After that, observation should be carried out and hypothesis should be tested with the help of collected data during the course of research. Then only a assumption can be carried out. So science only tests whether the hypothesis is correct or not. And the intention of science is not always to prove hypothesis right. Whether it's wrong or right, in both ways it is equally beneficial to the science. After testing the hypothesis, if the hypothesis is verifiable and it is supported by the facts, then we call it as a thesis. But if it is repeatedly tested and verified, it is called theory. And if a hypothesis is almost universally verifiable, then it becomes a law. So the aim or the objective of the scientific inquiry is generalizing a theory. Laws are example of generalizations. A theory is less general, law is more general. It only differs in terms of the degree of generality, but they are both generalized forms. Next, the interesting question that might arise is, why does science tries to arrive at generalization? So, generalizations is an explanatory statement. It holds true for the whole class. Like if a person says, Sandy walks on two legs, then it is not generalization because of the same person says human being walks on two legs, then it is generalization. But Sandy walks on two legs is not a generalization, because when a person says human being walks on generalization, it provides a rationale for explaining observable regularities in a repeated observation, because every human being walks with two legs. So in generalization, one can find a regular pattern that why they are explanatory. For example, every object or every time an object falls down if thrown is regularization. That it is a regular pattern. When an object is thrown, it comes down because of gravity. So now Newton's law of gravitation can explain this. It provides a rationale and observation. It provides the rationale for observable regularity and thereby helping us in making the prediction. Because of that, we can predict that if I am aware of Newton's law of gravitation, then it is not necessary to carry an object for experimentation to every place in the world to check its claim. And at the same time, it can be predicted that anything which we will throw anywhere in the world will fall down, and it helps us to constrain from jumping from the building. So this is another practicality of science and the reason why science tries to arrive at generalization. One another reason behind arriving at generalization is that generalizations become the source of future hypotheses, and therefore it helps us in the growth of science. From one generalization, a new hypothesis can be deducted, and that is how this scientific knowledge continuously grows. Hence, the basic objective of the scientific method is to arrive at generalization. So I hope now you have understood this concept clearly, that what is concepts, what is observation, what is hypothesis, what is science and scientific methods and elements of scientific methods, and the generalization. So in the next video we will start with the thinkers, and before starting with thinkers we will discuss few thinkers which are not mentioned in the UPSC syllabus, but they are required so that you can understand the rest of them properly, right? Thank you. And if you haven't subscribed my channel, subscribe it, and you can go to www.youtube.com/Indian Administrator directly to view all my videos. Thank you.